Carl Sagan, a world-famous American astronomer, once said, "We can judge our progress by the courage of our questions and the depth of our answers." As students, we're always told to ask tough questions and dive deep into our problems. But it's not very often that we get a chance to look at our own selves and ask ourselves the right questions. So with that in mind, today I'm here to give you some ideas, some strategies, something that's worked for me over the years on how you can introspect, ask yourself tough questions, and use that to strike a balance between different aspects of your life and hopefully better your mental health in the process. I come from a family of businessmen, doctors, and hopeful lawyers. So evidently, getting an education was seen as a rite of passage into society for my family. And I think a lot of people here can relate to that. It's a very common Canadian dream for our generation. For many of us, it's a key milestone in our social lives where we make our greatest friends and memories, where we find and discover ourselves, discover our purpose and passions. And I think the true purpose of education is to guide us, build us, and prepare us for all the challenges ahead. Advancing through years of education, we grow, learn, adapt, and develop our foundational steps for the lifelong career ahead. I'm a student. I just graduated over a year ago from my Bachelor's of Engineering, and now I'm pursuing a Master's degree in Aerospace Engineering. So I would say I'm an expert in, well, nothing yet. But there is one thing that I've done quite a lot in the recent few years, which is learning. I chose my field of Aerospace Engineering with pure curiosity and the willingness to learn. Also because it sounded cool. But the problem arose when wanting to get good grades and achieving more in life started to outweigh the actual learning process, which is why I got it in the first place. And having been a student for 2 whole decades and a teaching assistant for a couple of years now, you would think all this time would give you some sort of clarity and confidence with regards to what you're doing. Yet somehow we fall into this trap of pressure, the fear of failure, and grow to question ourselves. We start questioning if what we're doing is even worthwhile. And I saw myself, my peers, my colleagues, everyone around me suffering from this imposter syndrome. So for those who don't know, imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern where an individual fails to internalize their achievements and accomplishments and has persistent self-doubt and the fear of being exposed as an imposter. But more recently, as a teaching assistant, I saw my students suffering from this in unimaginable ways. Ways where the work is being done for the purpose of getting a good grade, not for the purpose of learning. And they would ask me questions like, what can I do to improve my grades? How can I get a better mark on this assignment? Can I get extra credit? And I wasn't immune to this. It affected me in ways too. The fear of being wrong, the fear of failure made me so restless that avoidance and lack of motivation took over at times. So all this just made me wonder, why are we perceiving education like this? As students, we begin to emphasize our academics so much, outweighing everything else, that we seem to lose perspective in life. We lose the realization that it affects a lot more than just our academics. The effect spills over into different aspects of our life. The fear of being trapped, the fear of failure, not only stresses us, it also begins to restrict us. In all this, I had to take a moment. I had to take a moment to stop and think and ask myself, what are my priorities? What is the purpose of all this? And more importantly, in this endless pursuit of success, why are we letting a number win over our mental health? And I think the only way we can change this is if we rewrite the equation of success and happiness. As students, I've studied numerous physics concepts and learned a lot about a lot of physicists and astronomers. What I find very interesting though is a lot of these great astronomers are also very interested in philosophy. Because the one thing common between the two different fields is asking questions and diving deep into concepts. In my experience studying science, physics, and sometimes literally pondering the universe, I've had the opportunity to look at myself or my own life introspectively, and in looking within, I was able to come up with a formula for balancing all these different aspects of my own identity. In physics, there is a concept called the Grand Unified Theory, or GUT for short. It is referred to as a model in particle physics in which at high energies, the 3 gauge interactions of the standard model, which is the electromagnetic, weak, and the strong forces can be merged together and put together as a single force. The concept that the forces of the universe can be combined and put together with just one equation. Unfortunately for the physicists, it's still a hypothetical concept. But there is one thing philosophical that we can make use of for here. For us, the question is, what is our grand unified theory? How do we go about equating fulfillment or success in life with just one equation? Or is that even possible? What are the variables or pieces of my grand unified theory or gut? So bringing me into the first step I see in formulating this equation, which is challenging expectations and asking tough questions. Digging deep into who we are and what we want, what affects us, gives us a sense of self, direction, and purpose. And we can start today by asking these questions to ourselves. What are the different aspects of my life that are significant to me? What are my hobbies? Who are my friends and family? And more importantly, what are my goals, professional versus personal? And after that, you'll realize that there are other environmental and external factors that we need to account for. So you can start asking yourself this very important question today, which is, what societal norms and expectations have I normalized and internalized and put on myself? These societal expectations and norms, combined with the situational stress that we deal with on an everyday basis, are detrimental to us. But they're even more detrimental to our mental health. And with this realization, we can gain a sense of direction and purpose for ourselves. You'll be surprised to discover different aspects of your life that excite you or motivate you further in life. Expanding your perspective will give rise to discovery, but not quite yet to the sense of separation. Many of us live with the overwhelming assumption that school stays in school and personal life stays at home. But for how many of us does it apply when it comes to stress? We all know that it not only transcends the barriers all through our lives, it dominates our actions and motivations at times. I notice when introducing myself, it goes something like, "Hi, my name is Kris, and I'm an aerospace engineer." And I know it's a great thing to take pride in your accomplishments and your achievements, but in that process, the unintended consequence for us is our identity becomes so closely tied with what we study or what we work as that we end up suppressing the other aspects of our lives and ourselves and traits that potentially make us who we are. Our personal goals start to entangle with our academic goals, and in no time, they're just one. So being the sole driver of our sense of worth, academic success at times is a motivator to us, but it is also simultaneously a stressor to us. At points where things weren't going well in my family, I began to overlook everything around me. Without realizing or giving it even a thought, I was allowing my personal struggles to inevitably affect my academics. And I realized that I needed to take some time and focus on one aspect of my life and identity at that point. And my struggles took the backseat to my academics. But when I lost control, which led to an academic failure, it turns around and makes you feel like an ultimate failure. Which brings me into the second step in formulating this equation of success, which is seeing the boundaries and then creating that separation between them. Once you've asked yourself what the significant aspects of your life are, the next step is to recognize that each aspect of your life gives a different thing back to you. You know, it brings something back to you, and it gives a different thing back to you, has its own needs. And more importantly, letting the stress of one aspect of your life trickle into the other is not only overwhelming us, it's also making it difficult for us to keep up with the rest. Overwhelmed with studies, jobs, and family struggles, I find myself struggling from all this and the ability to put it together. I would feel trapped at times where I would associate academic failure with being a failure. Failing a midterm or a test would upset me for days, and this is when I knew the content. I just couldn't test well. And it becomes very easy for our mindset of overwhelming failure to be the only thing that's happening in our life. We start picturing ourselves as a failure overall, considering it as a permanent state, or sometimes even a noun that describes us, not the verb that it is. So how do you turn that around? How do you make a change or make any difference? You start by giving yourself the leeway and the credit that you deserve. The worst thing you can do when you're failing or during the period of failure is being avoidant and disengaging, especially when it comes to education. We must realize that education, our career, our work is just one aspect of our lives and identity. We're complex peoples and we have a lot of stuff that's going on in our life. And it's important to be patient with yourself during that process. Now, once we set the boundaries, created a separation, and identified the different aspects of our life, it is equally important to note that with the complexity in ourselves can arise the problem of focusing too much on one thing over the other. Over the 4 years of my undergrad studies, all I can remember is putting all my time and energy into just academics. I would spend nights and nights in the library or the labs trying to finish reports and projects. These nights are the points where it could have been spent trying to talk to my family or with my friends. But that wasn't a thing at that point, I was operating under the assumption that if I finish it today or if I finish it earlier, I will have more time for my friends, for my family. And as we all know, that's one of the biggest lies our generation has internalized. But now you can all suspect. What happens when you give equal energy to everything? You give 2 hours to your work, 2 hours to your family. Putting it all together comes down to what? 30 hours a day. And you think you've found a balance at that point. Well, ignoring the impossibility of that scenario, there's another problem that arises with it. The fear of being overwhelmed and burning out. So for those who don't know, burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion due to prolonged and excessive stress. It's a sense of dread about work and frequent feeling of cynicism, anger, and irritability. So for many of us, that's a usual Monday sometimes. But trust me, I know a lot about this one. There were points in my life as an engineering student where I didn't know what the difference between a normal state is versus a burnout state. So the question is, how do you overcome that? Or what can you do to make a difference? Which leads me into the third and the final step, balancing the equation. Once you've asked yourself these tough questions about what defines you, separated and set the boundaries between them, and define your grand unified theory, the final thing is finding the balance between the three areas. So here's my gut. My gut is super complicated because complex people have a lot of things going on in their life. I have my family, my friends, my contribution to society through my career and education, my personal endeavors, goals, and ambitions, my partner, and my puppy, which takes up a lot of the time. The point here is everyone's gut looks a lot different, but the balance which is in the constant flux. And you can start today by writing it down on a piece of paper. It gives a feeling of control and ability for us to visualize it. Sometimes I do need to put more time into one thing than the other. And sometimes my family needs me for more than one thing, and I will be there for it, but not at the expense of my studies or myself. And sometimes my work is demanding and I have deadlines looming all the time, but I won't let that stop me from the commitments that I've made elsewhere. The goal of our gut is to not serve as a time management or a calendar. It's essentially to make us feel accomplished with our careers and our education, that even in tough times where we don't lack a clear picture, the accomplishment and the content stays with us. And it's all about the balance for the majority of us. And whenever I lack a clear picture as to what to do, I just go with my gut. So now in this constant battle between mental health and academics, if I was to give you a takeaway from all this, I would say start by challenging the expectations people have of you. Identify the different stressors and different aspects of your life and what's causing you to trickle the events of one into the other. Establish a separation for your own well-being and then find your gut and go with it. Thank you for listening.